Hi guys, welcome back to the LoR report. Today I'm going to be interviewing Eric Shen, who is the head of product for Legends of Runeterra and handles all things for cosmetics. So Eric, would you like to introduce yourself and tell people what you do?
Hi, yeah. So, like you just mentioned, I'm the head of product on the Legends of Runeterra team. That means, like, generally, I have a focus on like the operations and choices that the game makes from a strategic and tactical point of view, as it pertains to being like a business or a product. That means like it's less about like making game decisions or gameplay decisions, and more so on like, hey, what are the offerings we can give to players that help the product grow as a business.
Okay, perfect. So, just for transparency of the questions that are coming from, these were all questions I picked up from the live stream that you and Dave did probably a couple of weeks ago. At this point, you answered quite a lot of questions, but there were still questions that people have had, and they just wanted to. I thought I'd pick them up and see if we can get them answered. So, thank you for being here, and hopefully we can get some of these questions answered so that people can
Sure,
see
let's do it.
see what the team's going through. So I've broken them down into categories of basically each one of the cosmetics for the game, and we'll just go from one to another. So the first one is all things boards. So the first question is, do you have any boards currently in development for future events? Because we've not had a board now for at least over a year. And you've said in AMAs and on the live stream that you don't have one coming up soon, but with the feedback from the community, is this something that you've expedited since then, or have you thought of a plan as a team to handle this specific cosmetic?
Yeah. So yeah, the short answer is yeah, we are working on trying to get a board or boards back kind of on the roadmap in terms of like short-term release. I think we do have one that we feel pretty good. I don't want to make full-on promises because as was mentioned in the live stream and in previous places, the team is a different size and shape now. So some of the things like boards, which were kind of normal part of the normal operating course of business, they're less so. They're a little more opportunistic. But I do think we're likely to have a board coming in the short term with one of our future releases, and there are ongoing conversations about how we can like reshape that content pipeline into one that's like easier and better for us to like develop and maintain on kind of like a more regular ongoing process. Can't make any promises. There's still a lot of investigation being done. How we did it before is not the way we can do it going forward, but we really want to bring those back. We know that players love them. We love them. And we think there's definitely a space we can carve out to make that happen. But it takes some time for us. So yeah.
Yeah. So just going into a little bit there, you said that you can't do it the way that you did previously. Could you expand upon that? What's the thing that you cannot do anymore? Is it the frequent releases? Is it something else around that?
Yeah, I mean that's mostly it. Like we, as a community, and you've obviously noticed, we don't release them at any degree of frequency. Part of it is that the team and the structure of like the personnel and the vendors that we rely on to make the vendors, they had to change. And so as part of that, reorganization stuff, we had to rethink like where we were allocating a lot of our resourcing. First and foremost, for us as makers of Legends of Runeterra, we want to make sure the gameplay experience is as good as we can make it for players. That's why people play the game. Obviously, we love the cosmetics. We know that's core way to support the business. But first and foremost was valuing the player experience, and like when you get new champs, when you get new cards, trying to make sure that we preserve that experience as well as possible. So that was always priority number one, and continues to be. So when things like boards and guardians are like being evaluated against that context, like, okay, the way we used to do them, that's not going to work with the way that the team is structured now. But that being said, we're investigating. In fact, literally last night I had conversations with some of our like senior producers about how we can try and find new ways to put boards, maybe a little bit differently structured, maybe a little differently positioned, to bring them back. And so those discussions are active and ongoing right now. But timelines are difficult. There's just a lot of different moving parts. So, it's absolutely everyone on the team's aspiration that we bring them back in some form for players to have. But it just takes some time.
Okay, perfect. And so this follows up into the next question of one of the players I saw was Grandpa Roji, and he really likes the Sentinel board, I'm fairly sure, because of the clickiness. Like when you click on the board, something happens, whether it's a sound, whether it's effect. Has the team considered going back to older boards and doing what they do with older skins currently? Because there's skin upgrades in the game, which we've seen with recently with Arcade Hecarim. The first one I think was Sand Wraith Pike. Would it be something that the team is willing to do where they would go back to old boards and give them these new effects so that the board would feel as good as the legendary or the epic ones, even though it's like a default, like let's just say like a Noxus one or a fairly old one that was added the click interaction?
Yeah. So it's certainly something we can, I'm happy to bring back the team and discuss and see whether that's an option. It's not something that couldn't be as easily targeted or done opportunistically as that we do with champ skins. And like, just for a little bit of detail, the reason is that we have a lot of like level up animation and like realizations or artifacts that go on. That is part of our core pipeline for making cards like regularly, right? So it's easy to work with or have dialogue with the folks that work on those things, but like, hey, we have an extra like slot opening up, or these folks here have like there's additional slack in the way that the production pipeline is working, and that's when we like have an opportunity to like say slot in an upgrade to Pike or Echo. But for the board stuff, again, because that content pipeline is different and not being actively worked at the scale that the skins are, we don't see those like just, hey, opportunistically we found this slot available. So it would require a little more intentional effort on our side to be like, okay, let's look at our planning, let's look at our roadmap, let's look at where there might be opportunities to add it on or slot it in. So that would take like discussion, but it's definitely something that's a long-winded answer of saying like it's definitely something we would consider and I can bring back to the team.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's just I feel like there's definitely some boards that that when you look at them, you go, okay, this is really cool. And then a lot of players like the fact that you can click on the board, or like if they're waiting for their opponent to do something, they can just click around and they can mess. And like even if it's just a small thing, I feel like it's quite important for some players.
Yeah.
Like I know some players only buy boards that have click effects. So I feel like from a outside view, it feels like a no-brainer if the resources are available that maybe some older skins could be adjusted as well.
It totally makes sense, yeah, and I'm happy to bring it up to the team.
Perfect. So moving away from boards now, we move on to the other one that you've said in a statement as that doesn't do so well, which is Guardians. So the one question I have for this one is, would it be possible to see the Tacticians and the Chibi models from TFT to come over as LoR Guardians?
Yeah, so this one comes up a lot, and it's actually something the team has investigated a lot over all of the years. And it comes up like sort of repeatedly with different people on the team going like, hey, wouldn't it be great if you did this? So the players are not alone in recognizing the potential benefit here. Unfortunately, the answer is it's much harder than you would expect. Like there's a lot of different reasons, but fundamentally both the tech of the engines between what TFT is built in the League client and what we are built in with Unity, as well as all of like the different hookups that each of the different LoR Guardians versus the TFT like models and Little Legends, they're just extremely different. So even though like the base like thing feels very comparable, the total like spider web of things that have to go right in order for one to apply to the other, it just doesn't match up like at all. And it would actually definitely take more work to convert one of those legends over than if we made like a Guardian from scratch. I know that sounds weird. I know that like it's quite wild to think that that's true, but I can assure you many people across many disciplines have investigated this in their own free time as part of official things, and we all have agreed and come to the conclusion it's just really hard to kind of like make that happen. So, yeah.
So the idea of directly porting it is basically out of the question. Would the possibility of actually making a Chibi champion or a new design of Guardian, because as you said in the statement, is Guardians far exceeded the what you were getting out of them, which is basically you spend X amount on it and you're getting like 10 times less than you're spending on it. Or like that's how to dumb it down. That's how it's supposed to be read as.
Yeah. I mean, boards and guardians are kind of different in that way. When I talked about like boards like not doing what we kind of hope to, it's more that it's hit or miss. Sometimes we have boards that do fantastically well, and other times we have boards that really just that miss the mark with players and they don't resonate and they don't sell. And so that's why when we talk about like as I talked about earlier, we're looking at different ways to approach that content line and like bring it back and deliver it in a different way that like will kind of like match both player expectation and like what we're hoping out of the content line. Guardians are unfortunately like just a bit different in that fundamentally the entire content line takes more work, as I kind of already alluded to with the TFT conversation, than brings back to the team in terms of like what we see from player adoption. So as presently constructed with the way that we approach Guardians now, like there's very little chance that they'll come back as they were before. There's a couple different ways that I have been working with the team to try and like change that. One is we are looking into how we might like create chromas of existing guardians, so at least some way of bringing those things to players thematically can be there. So that's something we've talked about and have exploration. There's also like an R&D-ish project around like what if we radically reimagined what we consider a guardian to be. But that one I feel like that takes just like a lot more R&D. Like what was satisfying for players, what is something that we can do kind of like that dramatically reduces the effort and difficulty to make them while still feeling good for players, like as a thing to click on and interact with. Because I think we have a very reasonable high quality bar of like what we want players to feel good about, to make sure that the purchase is like worth their time and money. And so while those discussions are kind of like simmering in various like places among like the team, that one's like I think a little bit harder. I don't feel good about selling a player like something that is much more static and less personality than say like a Poro or an Infernal Drake or like a Cosmo. So we want to have fundamentally like an interactable like a Guardian for players, but really player reception and adoption just hasn't been there. I know there are definitely some like super fans who have every Guardian, and we love and appreciate you for doing that. But unlike a board, which definitely has like a lot of reach, the Sentinel board is a good example. The Star Guardian board, those have been really popular and done really well. Guardians, by and large, just haven't seen that adoption, and it makes it really tough for the team to say yes, we should continue investing in it when we just don't have the business case for it oftentimes.
Yeah, I was gonna say the one thing that I feel would be great is like how the tacticians, you could move them around on the board, but then you have the issues of you have to develop that as a system, then you have to see how it interacts with cards. Like there's a lot of stuff that's like you could imagine they work really well with, but then you have to think of the R&D and would the payoff be would it exceed what you put in? And like you said with the Guardians, it's very difficult. But yeah, so we'll finish that bit now with the Guardians, and we'll move on to the next bit, which is card backs. And there's only one thing to say about card backs, and it's the possibility of getting them animated, because we have 3 examples. For people that don't know, on the region reward track, if you go all the way to the end for Targon, Bandle City, and Shurima, they have animated cards. And is there the possibility that we could see them implemented into the actual game in the future?
Yeah, so there is a really major ongoing effort on the team to address one of the major roadblocks to why you don't see things like animated, like card art or animated card backs. And the reason is like memory usage across Riot's commitment to making the game as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. And that includes like devices that are not like bleeding edge. And so the game scene, as you might not be surprised at, is like there's a lot going on. There's a lot of memory being used. There's a lot of like cool, awesome animations we're doing. There's a lot of like information that the game processor has to like manage across both your hand, their hand, interactions on the game during like the during turns and stuff like that. So the memory usage is really high, and that's the main barrier to why some of this isn't there, especially I think for like card backs. There's also, of course, like depending on what you consider a reasonable animation for, say, like card art, there's of course difficulties at scale and things like that. But that aside, like I think it's a very reasonable ask. Like, hey, we have some animated card backs in the game. Why don't we have them in the game scene? And it's really about that memory issue, coupled with the fact that we want to make sure players have a good play experience first and foremost. So, if you are running it on an Android device that isn't like, the latest thing that Samsung has released, we want to make sure you still play really well. And so memory is a constant and very firm thing that we're always trying to address and hit. And so, adding animated card backs would just add to that memory footprint, and we still like really need to work on reducing that, and we're work really hard at trying to find that. So until we can get that memory usage down in a way that we feel really good about, like animated cardbacks are just gonna kind of have to wait. But they're again at the top of the list of like many people's both on the team and the community clearly in terms of wish list of what we can like add and make cardbacks more exciting. I think it's a clear no-brainer. As you pointed out, we have several examples in the game, but it really is that memory constraint issue coupled with like wanting to make sure as many players have a great play experience first and foremost.
So just to add to that, then, would it be could it be an idea that it's maybe an opt-in thing, like a toggle in the game? So currently, the only to think of a toggle for me is I'm colorblind, so I turn on the colorblind mode. Would it be something that you could potentially do to be like, hey, show me animated cards, and you choose to I don't know how it impacts memory, but like choose to see the card. So like default, people don't see it, and then if you decide that you want an animated card back, it like kind of tells you like, hey, to use this, you're going to need to turn it on. Would that be something that the team could potentially look into or has looked into in the past?
Yeah, so that's a great idea. I mean, we do have settings that for like I think they're video quality settings that you have as a toggle availability. So like there's ultra, there's medium, and stuff like that. So I think that's something we could definitely explore as part of those core settings. So yeah, that's something I'm happy to bring back to the team and investigate.
Okay, perfect. So the next one is kind of so for people that don't know, I have to send these questions to Riot in advance, and these two questions were talking about the emote slots, but I'm gonna have to change them because so the first one was how many emote slots, and yesterday we got 2 days ago we got the amazing news that basically emote slots just don't exist anymore because we just have the pop out. So I'll change the question a bit. What was the team's decision to? So you said you were going to expand it, and instead of expanding it, you just like it's unlimited. There's just like a slider now, so you can see all of your emotes. What was the team's decision on doing that rather than just like adding an extra column?
There's a short answer, and it is that the slide out is easier. And like ultimately, while it is fun, and you can think of the current panel now as like your favorites panel, right, to make it easier to access. Because I know for some players out there, they probably have like dozens and dozens of emotes, and you might spend your timer scrolling to find the perfect emote for the moment that you have. But fundamentally, it was like an easier one that was like a better player value, right? Like instead of like making it like 6 slots to 9 slots or 12 slots, we just felt like why not have everybody be able to have access to all of them. And it's all for a whole bunch of like user experience problems like and so fundamentally that's what it boiled down to. We're like we want to give players more access to emotes, why not give it to them all? It just seems easier. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an amazing feature. Absolutely love it. The only thing I could possibly ask for is a search bar. I went on the early access and I opened it and I was like, I need to find an emote. And because you have access to everything, I was scrolling forever. But apart from that, it is perfect. I literally could not have asked for a better feature to be added. It is great.
Yeah. Definitely a filter or a way to like eventually add either like favorites or a search bar is definitely something we'll we have in our backlog of like quality of life improvements. So yeah, your head's in the right space.
Yeah, good to know. So after emotes, then we will move on to titles. So titles are only fairly new. They got introduced in the World Ender expansion, which was at the start of the year. So the only question I have then for them is, would you consider making custom titles that you could sell in the shop that are specific to champions? So the only thing I want to add to this is that Ruben did a tweet, and I don't know if the teams ideology has changed since then. Of people who hit like mastery points or like achieve certain things can unlock one. So like an example here that I have is like Meep for Bard. So like if you maybe have like 100k mastery points on Bard, you unlock his like special tag. Is this something that the team is still working on? Like, are you still thinking about it, or is it something that you could potentially look at monetizing for like 50 coins for like a title or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything really is on the table, and I think you made a really good observation that like for titles, we felt like it was just like a really cool way to fundamentally reward players, especially in the PvP area, to let players like show off their achievement in that area, that had a unique and special place. And the same thing with like the pins for Gauntlet rewards, right? That loading screen's like a really good place for a player who has achieved a lot to show those things off. And that was really like where we were initially thinking about and going with titles and pins. Because it was also kind of like a new idea, we didn't really know or have a good sense of like what player interest and adoption would be. So we're like, hey, you know what? Let's release it. Let's test it out. We feel good about the fact that like a title expressing your PvP achievements, especially in the competitive sphere, is one that will like do really like well, or at least be well received among those audiences. We felt we knew we would feel really good if our title was reflecting how well we had done across a Gauntlet season. But beyond that, we hadn't really like had made like a grand plans around like, hey, we could monetize them or apply them to other things. So what that means is like the space is wide open. That's definitely things that we would consider and bring on. The only thing for me is like, hey, I'd really like to know, and I want to find ways to like get better confidence around like what would the like player sort of acceptance of those kind of options be. I think some people certainly would love to have a title like Meep or whatever, and I think it makes a ton of sense. But at the same time, like making that the decision to build or expand on that protocol and that content line in those ways, it's not trivial, and it's not like free. So like it will require like us to kind of like weigh and allocate resources and make trade-offs on what we build and what we further refine. And so I just want to get a little more confidence around like, hey, how many people would really be interested in potentially either monetizing or playing champ mastery to unlock those titles. But certainly as a expansion of that like content line, it's definitely a great place to look.
Yeah, so just to add on to that bit of like what people would be more willing, I feel like so this goes into the because I have a section on pins and badges. So these are all coming out for expansions recently. So we have Kale's Wings was the first one. Then we had Samira's Guns. Then we had the Neela Flower, I think it was. Now we've just seen that the Volibear one's done. So these are all for like champions in the expansion. Maybe the team could like use the idea of monetizing the original ones that came out. So for like example, I know Captain Sarah loves Miss Fortune, and she would do anything for a pair of her guns. So I feel like the older champions that were like we all know that they're never gonna get a badge. I think that the people would be more willing to buy the pins for champions that have already come out and they know that they're not gonna get the chance. But it's the same with the titles, in my opinion. I feel like a lot of people would. There's diehard fans for the champions. Like you'll have the Rico Rexes that play Renekton, and the Captain Sarahs that will only play Miss Fortune, or the Aikaidos that will only play Seraphine. I feel like those people would be more willing to spend the 1 or 200 coins just to get that title. That's like, okay, this is a good title. It's related to my champion, and it would do like I'd be willing to spend money on that. I feel like knowing those champions have come out and it's not ruining it for other champions in the future, I feel like that would be personally the good middle ground for that. But it's up to you guys when you guys want to go down that route.
Yeah. I mean, I fully agree with you. I definitely want and would love for players who are like, super fans of particular champions to be able to express that fandom and rep, for that champ on both the title and the pins for their loading screens. But like I said, it's just a matter of like really trying to understand like what will it take for us to expand that line, which again, it's not trivial or free. We have looked into it just a little bit and weighing that against like what we think the adoption is. But it's definitely a place that we're going to look into further, especially knowing that players have brought it up as a thing they're looking for. So.
Okay, perfect. So that was the titles and the pins. So we'll move on to the next bit, which is skins. And this is like the biggest one because I feel like this for cosmetics is like one of the biggest areas that that could be expanded or could be improved upon. So there's quite a lot of questions. So the first one, which you alluded to before, was the possibility of animated skins, and you kind of explained that, and it's just memory issues. So is there anything else you want to add to animated skins, or is it just
Yeah.
basically the fact of just its memory issues?
I mean, memory issues is definitely the number one constraint. I would also say though, like it's it it's something where we have done our internal investigations. We even have like mock-ups by very motivated, excited like artists who have said like, hey, this is something we could do, and so it's just uh, a continual investigation process of like how can we try and take some of these like cool ideas and what players imagine should and could happen, and really seeing how it can translate in engine but also with these like really big memory constraints. Like I think it's often very, I think lots of people can agree on like a particular concept or model or like Photoshop or Illustrator thing that's like, that looks really cool, that looks really great. People would definitely be like waving dollar bills to try and get those things, myself included. But at the same time, the way to actually make it happen in game is just like more complicated and difficult. So I know it's not a great satisfying answer. Believe me, the team has looked and tried and investigated repeatedly around this, even more so than card backs. But there's just like a host of like things that make it more difficult than you might expect. Memory being like just number one on that list.
Okay, then. And then we'll just go into the next question because I'm just curious about. I'm looking at the time and I see that we've not got
Sure.
long left.
Yeah.
So the next one is follower skins because there's a few followers in the game that have skins. Is there any idea within the team to expand upon that or like make it so that you can equip those as like a default?
Yeah. So follower skins are definitely a thing we want, myself in particular. But there's a couple again like technical issues that make that like not straightforward. That's not to say we can't do it. We do want to. But the first is that like when we built champ skins, we built it with a tech assuming champs like primarily. So we do have follower illustrations, but they're very much tied to the champion profile. So like Evelyn's Husks is like a really good example. Those card and those profiles are fundamentally attached to the champion and not to the card itself. So if we're going to do follower skins, which we want to, it would require like a fairly significant engineering effort to refactor what we have to do so. The second question is more of a user experience one. Like if we allowed you to skin or like equip skins for like, let's say not just followers but almost every card in the game, because that is an option that we have, like what does that become like in terms of like loadouts and equipping and the store. At some level you can't have like a store where literally every card now has like 5 skin options, right? If you thought the emote panel was bad, wait till we got to like skinning champ spells. So that's another thing where we want to balance and weigh like what does that experience like seem like and look like before we make that choice. But like the investigation is for sure ongoing. I think follower skins is one of the coolest ideas. I'd love for that to exist, and it's something that I've personally like repeatedly asked for the team to be like, hey, give me estimates around like what it'll be. But fundamentally, because it's a champion tech versus card tech, that's like the main reason why it's coming later in our like pipeline.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I think follower skins. There's definitely the people like seeing it, like the Santa Poro or the Pulsefire, Sandstone Charger. They're definitely cool. And when you see them, you're like, oh yeah, I completely forgot this existed. But yeah, I'd love to see it expanded. See because followers are one of those things where you could include them in every single one of your decks. Like champions, you can't. Like if you're in a tournament, you could in theory run 3 for your deck and run a Centoporo in every single one. So it
Right.
feels like you could get more use out of that skin than you could a champion.
Yeah, fully agree.
Yep. So the other one for this is, will skin upgrades always add a level up animation, Or could we see common skins move to rare and receive spell icons? So an example of this is one that for me, I have Pool Party Tarek, and he still doesn't have a skin for his spell. I can't Blessing of Targon. He still has the default skin. So when you do the skin upgrades, is it always going to be from no animation to animation, or is it something where you would consider just doing a quick SketchUp of some art and going, okay, we'll do this one as a small push?
Yeah, so upgrades across all the tiers, they're certainly on the table. And I think especially if there are ones like the Tarek example or others that players like really feel like, hey, it would just feel a lot better if this was upgraded or altered to like kind of match the rest. I think one recent example the team is like pulled out is origin cards for like say like Aatrox, where his full set for Lunar Eclipse was we were able to like order additional art, but then his origin card to the left is just kind of like his base one. So there are definitely like we want to look into doing that as well. So level ups are not the only one. I will say level ups tend to appear more frequently. Again, just for like the way our art pipelines and our production realities pan out. It's just like because of changes or alterations to our plans, we have like the bandwidth to do this level up upgrade over here, and that just happens a little bit less with the other parts of the card production pipeline. So short answer is like yes, but it's just going to happen, I think, a little less frequently. But I'm very happy to take the community's feedback of like, hey, here's a list of things that we love, we want the most to see those upgrades, and we can definitely bring it to the team.
Sounds good, sounds good. And then there's another question here, but I'll probably skip it just because, like I said, I'm cautious on the time. So we'll just go to the better ones. So we'll leave the skins and we'll go on to Prismatics. And it's just a simple question. Does the team have any plans to change the current Prismatic system?
Short answer is yes. We definitely do. It is definitely part of our longer term roadmap. We plan out things not just like in months or years, but multiple years in advance. And Prismatics is definitely on that roadmap. Part of the reason why it's a little bit slower or a little bit later out is that there's a couple of different reasons. The biggest reason is that the first release of Prismatics, I think player reception taught us a lot. I think I'm proud of the system we released, but players, I think the reception is a little bit less than we anticipated. So we want to make sure the next time we do it, it really hits the mark with players. People are excited to be opening those prismatic chests, getting these new ones. And so that requires the second part of it, which is a set of skills that is more limited in the world than you might expect. It requires people with like multiple discipline skill sets to be able to kind of deliver both concept that might look great in like Photoshop or Illustrator, but then also being able to translate that into Engine and rendering in 3D. And so that transition, it's not just one person, but like that set of team coming together and doing that really well is hard. It's really hard to do. And so what we're waiting for is to make sure that the concepts that we are developing internally also come with achievability in Engine with the kind of folks that we have at Riot who can deliver both a great 2D experience concept into a great 3D version in Engine and in development. And it's not just artists, it's also engineering. Like there's actual technical work that needs to be done in order to make like frames perform really well. Again, the memory issue is also another one as well. So you have technical artists and engineering like working on that problem really hard. So that's why it's a bit further out. It's actually, I think, our number one thing we want to improve in terms of the cosmetic lines, because the player reception again isn't what we had hoped for, and we really want to rectify that. We really want to make a much better version of these things, and that's why we're like putting a lot more time and effort. The last third thing I will say is that like part of the way we want to do it, it will require kind of a restructuring or a refactoring of how the card frames intrinsically are made. They're a bit unwieldy, and so we've done again with the memory investigation is a big part of it. We want to like redo it so it takes way less memory, and it's way easier for us to put like not just any one particular set of prismatics, but potentially multiple types of prismatics. So you can have like a Bilgewater themed one or a KDA
That's
themed
what
one.
I was going to ask for.
Yeah. So there's a lot of exploration that wants to go there, and we want to make that easy for ourselves and as well as delivering well for the players. So it's really, really complicated. I mean, making games, to be honest, is really hard. And so there's a lot of things that like on the player side, like, oh, I just want like a black shiny frame, or I want borderless, or I want like all these other cool ideas. The ideas are not the problem. It's the technical ability. And it's not even ability. We have the folks and the ability to do so, but it's making sure it lands at the quality bar where like players are going to be like, yes, that's awesome. That looks super fantastic, and it's really worth the effort and grind to like hit high ranked, get multiples of those prismatic chests, stuff like that. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, if you guys can somehow get like region themed like prismatics, I think personally they would sell amazingly. I literally have here an example of like a Targon one or like a Void board. Like, even though we don't have Void as a region, like just the idea of it, oh, this card has been corrupted. I think it would work really well. But like, just to add on to that, you said that like it wasn't well perceived. Would it be something that if you did this and it wasn't well perceived again, that you guys would probably just take a step back and be like, okay, we've tried our best at this. I'm just curious to like, it didn't do well once. If you put all this work into it and it didn't work again, would it be something that you guys would consider to go, okay, we're going to go back to the drawing board, or would you be quite confident to say, no, we're going to call it there for Prismatics?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the underlying work that we're planning for and investigating right now is to give ourselves as many like shots as possible to really deliver on the player experience. So, we want to build the system in a way where like, hey, if the next release we have again for whatever reason doesn't hit the mark, we have a much simpler and much more scalable sort of system in place at the foundational level to be like, all right, let's take another pass. Let's like do another like either approach artistically or aesthetically. So that's a big part of the work that we have there. So I'd feel confident that like even if our next shot on goal like misses, like we're setting ourselves up for the opportunity to really give players something that will ultimately land.
So that would be something of just listening to the community, seeing what they have to say, and kind of like incorporating the ideas into building what would then be a better concept or idea.
Yeah, that's certainly the goal. That's certainly the goal. Like I can't like fundamentally promise, but like talking with the community and really getting an idea of like what works or what feels good for a large, enough portion of the audience is like a major part of that process. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. So, we just gotta do one last question before we wrap things up, and it's just going to be the final question, which is there something that you are particularly excited to see in the future regarding cosmetics, whether it be something coming up or something that's quite far down the road that you can share?
Well, it's interesting that the answer I had for this is actually the last one we touched on. Like, I'm really actually quite excited for the card frames future and opportunity. As you can tell from my answer, like we've thought a lot about it. We think that like it's one of the best ways for us to kind of deliver on what players expect out of like card frames, foils, alternate art, borderless things. All of these things are actually in the realm of being augmented with card frames. So that's why we put a lot of thought and like planning into how we need to like fundamentally change a lot of things at a ground level to make that ultimate world come to realization in a way that like delivers on what players really want, and knowing that like different players have different wants. I think that's a big part of like the discussion set. So I'm really excited for that future and opportunity. To be honest, like a card frame that like goes for every card you've ever owned, every card that you can open right now, and every card in the future. That just feels like to me like a really wonderful opportunity space, and the team's really excited about that. So yeah, that's really what I'm most excited for the cosmetics world, with kind of like resuming boards being a close second.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm quite looking forward to the idea of prismatics, because personally I'm not a massive fan of prismatics, but the idea of that we could potentially have borderless or like region themed ones, I think that would be quite enjoyable. Just personally saying. But yeah, we're gonna wrap it up there because we've definitely gone over the time. But I appreciate you joining me today and talking about all these cosmetics. It's something that I quite enjoy, all the cosmetics for LoR. So honestly, just thank you for what you do, and thank you for taking the time for the interview.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and look forward to the next one.